Today we're talking about various tips for Darwin projects that will make you better at the game. There should be something in here for everyone. It's partially my own experience as well as tips that I've collected, for example, from Reddit, etc., just to put them all together in one collection. If you're not up to date with Darwin project anymore, the game is now free to play for a few days, and there's also customization in the game. A lot of the hitboxes have been reworked and it's absolutely amazing. I'm loving it as of late. And with that, let's jump right into the tips. The first one are your melee attacks. After you get used to the range of the attacks, it's actually quite useful to look into the different attacks that you can do. You have your normal swing that will happen if you just run forward at the enemy, but there are others with different benefits. First of all, if you leap and then attack while pressing forward, you will get an overhead attack. According to some people, this attack has a slightly longer range. I was unable to verify that so far, but it seems to be the case. Then there's also the uppercut, which is basically the reverse option. In that case, you want to use your attack while running or walking and then jump up right after using the attack, so while you're still in the animation. That will turn your attack into an uppercut, which knocks the enemy further away and further into the sky as well. This sets up for very easy to land arrow shots afterwards as well, as it's kind of predictable where the enemy will land. And then, last but not least, you have the jumping side swing. That's what happens if you jump up and use your attack while not pressing forward, so pressing any other direction, which will resemble the normal attack overall. There are also other tricks you can do. For example, you can swing your axe before using a teleport, so using the teleport right after starting to swing the axe, teleport right in front of your enemy, and the animation will finish at the target. So you will basically teleport forward and then hit them the moment you land. This is relatively hard to time, I actually didn't manage it yet, but it is possible. There is also the possibility to parry arrows and snowballs with a well-timed melee attack. This takes some practice and you shouldn't purely rely on it, but it can definitely be helpful in the right situation. Traps can also be broken by melee attacks or arrows, so if you spot them out, you can attack them instead of stepping into them and save yourself some precious time. Last but not least, a very interesting technique during combat that most veterans are definitely familiar with is backstepping. Quite often, less experienced players will charge at their enemies and use their melee in hopes of getting the swing in first. This can work sometimes, but a well-timed backstep can also prevent this attack from hitting. Now you have to know the exact distance. If your enemy gets too close and hits you, then the backstep won't help. But if you time it exactly right, then they will swing in the air and you will be able to retaliate right after. Again, this requires very good timing and knowledge of the distance, so practice this whenever you can, especially before the matches start, as often you will otherwise still get hit. Next, I have two very basic tips for surviving your first matches. A. Use your microphone. This will ensure that you can talk to the director, and especially if you're a new player, he may help you out a little bit more. Not always, doesn't have to be the case, but it can definitely happen, and you don't want to waste that opportunity. Second, hiding is not a bad strategy as a beginner. If you're really good at the game already, you typically want to look for kills because you get a large amount of resources through killing other players. But if you're relatively new, there is no shame in just playing a little bit more passively, finding out where the resources are first and farming and trying to get the last kill basically. You will often be at a disadvantage in that situation, but maybe your opponent already lost a lot of health at this point, and that can help you in that regard if you have been successful at escaping enemies for the most part. This is not for everyone obviously, but I generally found it easier to survive your first rounds like that. There's also a bit of a dirty combat tactic that some people use, which can help in that context too, which is the TRIPWIRE combination with the cage trap. What you want to do is you want to place tripwires, and when an enemy falls over the tripwire, then you drop a cage trap on them, so it activates. That will leave you and the enemy in the cage, and as you will have the first hit because they're tripwired, you can basically smack them around the cage and they hardly have any chance to survive once in this situation. Obviously, a very experienced player can also deal with that, but overall, for a beginner, this is somewhat of a valid strategy, even though a bit frowned upon, to fight with more experienced players. In order to travel across the map faster, use the electric mushrooms that you find in some places. If you hit a mushroom, you'll get knocked back quite a significant distance, which can allow you to travel faster. However, keep in mind that you should see where you will roughly land, because if you're not careful with that, you may end up in a place where you didn't want to be and you have no way to control where you land unless you have the super jump. When falling from a cliff or being knocked back by an enemy, you will typically roll forward afterwards. But if you hold back, or the S key, then you will actually roll backwards instead, making for some unexpected jukes. When it comes to stamina, use it wisely. Drain it, but don't completely drain it. Leave a little bit left so that if you need it for a fight, you will still be able to sprint. At the same time, if you're keeping too much stamina, then you're effectively wasting time, as you will often stop to collect resources anyways, and that is the best way to refill your stamina. Sprint to the next resource, try to keep your stamina as low as possible, then collect the resource and your stamina will be full and you can move on. Don't use jumps too much while traveling though, not more than necessary as they drain a lot of stamina. The same goes for jumping in fights. Jumping in fights will drain a lot of your stamina that you need for your sprinting and your juking, and it also makes you more predictable as the landing of a jump is relatively predictable. Exceptions here are basically only when it comes to melee, because you have those different melee attacks in combinations with the jumps. So in those situations, you can obviously use the jumps for that. When it comes to early items, there are obviously preferences in playstyle, but there are some general tips that should be applicable in most situations. First of all, keep in mind that an early armor can save your life. It costs a lot of resources and you have to hold back on other things a little bit, but it can really pay off, so consider building an armor very early into the game. Likewise, make 2 to 3 arrows very early, just so you have a way to fight back if an enemy shows up. Also, the first item that you want to upgrade heavily is typically your boots. The movement speed will not only help you in combat, but also help you traverse across the map much faster, and that overall pays off in the long run. Whereas cloaks are mainly there for modifiers, and I personally avoid them until later stages of the game because I usually don't see the benefit in comparison to the boots or other items that you can use for combat. When it comes to crafting, unless you quickly need to build something, it is recommended to hide in trees to craft. That way, it's much harder for enemies to find your traces on the map unless they step into those particular trees or use the radar. Campfires will always leave a trail in the form of smoke that goes up into the sky and is very, very easy to see. As such, be cautious when placing a campfire and enemies are nearby. And if you have snowballs as one of your items, then you can use those to extinguish the fire the moment you fully heat it up. That will also take away the trail. Also, if you're on your campfire and you don't have anything else to do, this is a very good time to build some more snowballs. For the purpose of the campfire, it's good to always keep at least one wood handy, just in case you run into a situation where you can't find any wood and your body heat is getting way too low. Let's look at the arrows a little bit. Your arrow choice actually defines a fair bit of your playstyle. The standard arrow will give you 5 extra base arrows, but is in my opinion usually not worth it, as the benefits of the other arrows just seem better. The other arrows all have their purpose. I would generally recommend either choosing hunter arrows or fire arrows in most situations. The extra stamina is nice, but often not that needed in a fight, especially in a situation where you are using your arrows. The hunter arrows are great for lining up shots, as you will know exactly where your target is, and especially when you're getting used to the game, it is not as chaotic in teamfights when you have a mark on the enemy. The fire arrows simply have higher damage, but with the fire arrows you have to get used to them a little more, so it's more of a practice thing, as you will have slower projectiles as well. When you try to hide from the enemy and their arrows in a fight, keep in mind that hiding behind trees that you can walk through is not possible. It has to be a solid tree that you can't walk through, and it won't block any attacks. So if the enemy has a tracking arrow on you, they will just shoot you right away if you do that. When it comes to surviving a nuke, a common trick is to run into a close-off zone, hide there until the nuke is over, and then go back over into the nuke zone. That obviously comes with a downside that you're gonna drain your body heat very, very quickly, but there's a little trick here. What you can do is place a fire in the nuke zone and then stand right next to it in the unnuked zone. So you will not have your fire getting extinguished too quickly, you will not lose as much body heat, and you can just go right back over afterwards with full body temperature. When the director places a manhunt on you, there are a few ways to deal with that. First of all, you want to use cabins with a radar. These will have a satellite dish on top, so you can tell that this cabin will have a radar, and if you look inside, you know where the enemies are and if they're closing in on you. If you do that, what also helps is building tripwires or traps around you, so you know exactly when an enemy comes in, and then you can attack them right away and have an advantage over them. On top of that, there's also the possibility to utilize portals. If the enemies are not too close to you, then using a portal can often throw them off, as you're suddenly somewhere else on the map and they may not want to walk down all the way or walk up to the portal first to catch you. This doesn't always work, but can be a good situation to utilize if you don't have too many closed off zones yet. A generally useful tip is audio play. Often you can hear enemies before you can see them. There are different sounds for crafting and placing traps, so you can hear that as well, hear what the enemy is doing. And apparently there's also a sound if somebody uses the radar, so you know when they can locate you that way. Also, chests apparently emit a light buzzing noise, though I've never been able to hear that actually. We will get into equipment choices in a future video, we'll talk specifically about that. What I will say here is don't underestimate the power of the glider to move around the map and the smoke bomb to get out of sticky situations, as well as the tripwire, which actually trips enemies for a significant amount of time. On the other hand, the power leap can actually be used to get out of tripwires when you're tripped. And as a little bonus tip, the medkit and other things like harvesting can actually be done at the same time, so if you absolutely want to optimize your timing, that can also help. If you're using snowballs, these can use to kill deer without wasting arrows on them, now that we don't get arrows back from killing deer anymore. These are all the tips I collected for this one. I hope this was interesting and insightful. If you're new to the channel, feel free to stop by and ring the bell, it really helps me out. Other than that, once again, Darwin project is now free to play. If you haven't played it yet, I highly advise checking it out. It's really, really cool. See you for the next one tomorrow. DukeSloth, out.